Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and after the Demons legally claimed ownership of Optus Stadium in 2021, they have been forced to foreclose on the venue as a result of our second consecutive loss at that ground this year. These two losses have been our first defeats at the holy site since our drought-breaking premiership. Joining me tonight to dissect another devastating loss to a team from the West this season is veteran Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Welcome back from New York. They rejected me from doing jury duty in the last couple of weeks, but they said to me, you're a Melbourne supporter. You won't be doing anything in September, so I've been signed up to go back there in September.
Yeah, well... No, you clear your diaries, folks, or not clear your diaries. Start filling them up in September because we'll see what Big Man has to say about that. So also joining us is that guy to give us that some hope that our 2024 season isn't a complete bust, Big Man. Good evening, Big Man.
Good evening, Andy. Welcome back from States. Interesting time to be in America. Well done. You got rid of a president. Bad luck you couldn't have done something for our win-loss column. So.
Well, I did. My record while I was away was 2 from 2, and I got back Friday, and I said to George before, by Sunday, I wish I had been back there. So, yeah.
Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. Yeah, very tough day in the West. Disappointing game, wasn't it? Really disappointing game. But the season's far from over. I mean, question I asked a few weeks ago is just like forgetting the sort of emotion of another tough loss and not wanting to paint myself into a corner as the eternal optimist is, is anyone seriously writing the Blues off? They just got touched up 2 weeks ago by the Dogs. Is anyone seriously writing the Cats off? They just got touched up down at their home ground equally as badly as we did by the Dogs again. Objectively, if you take the emotion out of it, no one is saying Carlton because they got flogged. I know that they're second on the ladder and they've got a more impressive record than us, but it's not a compellingly better record than us. But no one on the basis of getting that touch up when you're away, Andy, is saying, no, Blues can't win it anymore. So, or they're not they're not contenders. So, it's incredibly even. This season of footy, I think the volatility of the results, I might ask Willow to have a look at it, but I suspect in terms of the scoring differential and the win-losses, between teams is one of the more extreme in a long time in terms of the sort of volatility of the favourites winning, for instance, or not that we were favourites in this game, which is good context.
I don't know, Big Man. I can't see us winning another game this year, and I don't care about the results of the other teams and what they're doing. We just look miles off it, and even the wins that we had while I was away. And I did see them, but, who do we beat? West Coast. We beat Essendon, the great pretenders.
Well, Essendon were second on the ladder when we beat them. So, of course we can create any narrative to say we haven't got a chance, but stripping that away.
Who have they beaten this year? No, Essendon.
Well, but that's like
okay.
Yeah, you could play that game all day. Who have Freo beaten?
Us twice.
Well, you've just said that we're no good. You've just said we're no good, so you can't count us as twice, can you?
No.
So who have Port beaten?
They're no good either. There's no good.
Well, they're above us,
all crap.
and we beat them.
I'd worry if you're watching Port Adelaide games, Big Man.
Well, it's going to be this season. As I said, this is I'm increasingly of the mind of like I've been talking about for a long time. But the preparation it's going to be a very small window of time, and I wouldn't be like the Swans, for instance, are clearly the standout team. But as I wrote on Demonland during the week, one of the key defining features of their season so far is their incredible run with injuries. And it is making a big difference. And if they lose 2 or 3 of the players that, McInerney looks like he's out. Is it McInerney? Not McInerney. One of their players. They've lost a couple of players on the weekend. If, they'll come back to the pack and we were, we're up without our two best players. So, there's still a lot to play out this season, and I'd be shocked if we don't make finals. Put it that way.
All right, prepare for a shock. So each week I put the call out to our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We absolutely love the feedback, and we do reward our loyal listeners who take that time to provide these 5-star reviews by giving them a shout out on the show. And Penny Dropper writes, next best thing to an inside briefing. Honestly, you guys know more about the MFC team than anyone in the media and anyone else who doesn't work inside the club. As much as I love the club, I love dissecting games and learning why one team ends up with more points on the board after 100 minutes, and your show feels that appetite to overflowing. Thanks to all of you for all of the time you put into researching, rewatching games, trawling Demonland for nuggets, analysing stats, editing, and everything else. Well, thank you for that fantastic review, Penny Dropper. Full disclosure, we don't purport to know more about the ins and outs of the Demons than anyone else. We're just three blokes yapping about the Ds, and that's why we like to get questions and comments in from our audience, because this podcast, in essence, is just an extension of demonland.com, which, was a forum that was created for all Demon voices to be heard. So keep that feedback coming, and we will give you a shout out on the show. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and you want to leave us feedback, post a comment or a question for the show, post under our podcast post each week, or just slide into our DMs. As I always say, we won't read out your full name on the show. In addition to being available on Apple, Android, Spotify, SoundCloud, and or your any preferred podcasting app, the Demonland podcast is available to be watched and listened to on YouTube. Just search for Demonland Podcast to find our channel. And if you want to chat with other Demon fans who've never been to our forum, head on over to demonland.com, sign up, and you can chat with other Demon fans from across Australia and around the world. It's completely free. And in addition to being able to post questions and comments for the show, as we've got every week, there's also a plethora of topics and threads discussing all things Demons related. So join in on the conversation. It's a great place to vent after a loss, and boy, is there a lot of venting going on at the moment. You'll probably hear some tonight. If you would like to join us on the air to talk about any of these topics or just to vent, then please give us a call on 0390163666. That's 0390163666. I'll answer, I'll put you on mute and bring you on when there is a break in our conversation. During the week, give that number a call, leave us a message, we'll play it on the show. We've got a couple lined up for tonight. If you are listening live, join us in the chat room. Head on over to demonland.com/podcast. We're live every Monday, so if you want to listen to the show live, head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at our new earlier time of 7:30 p.m. And let's get into the match overview. Demons faced a daunting challenge at Optus Stadium on Sunday, suffering a demoralising 50-point defeat to the Fremantle Dockers. The final margin underscored a match where Melbourne's lack of a ruckman I guess subsequently that caused the overall midfield dominance of Fremantle, and that was clearly evident. And from the outset, Freo's ruck duo of Sean Darcy and former Demon Luke Jackson exploited Melbourne's ruck void, winning the hitouts in the first quarter 10-1, and this dominance translated into a clearance count of 14-0 in Fremantle's favour, setting up numerous scoring opportunities for them. And by the end of the quarter, Fremantle has established a 21-point lead, and the D's had failed to register a goal. And the second term saw Melbourne briefly claw back into the contest with goals from Caleb Windsor and 2 from Jacob Van Rooyen. However, Fremantle's midfield continued to dictate play, highlighted by Andy Brayshaw's tireless work, amassing 41 disposal by game's end. And despite some missed opportunities, Fremantle extended their lead to 30 points at half-time. And Fremantle, they began the third quarter with a flurry of goals, effectively ending any hope of a D's comeback, and the Dockers' ability to transition the ball swiftly and the relentless pressure saw the margin swell to a game-high 53 points. Although the D's managed to reduce the deficit slightly with 3 late goals, however, the quarter ended with Fremantle firmly in control, leading by 36 points. Final quarter saw Fremantle consolidate their dominance, kicking the first 4 goals to put the game beyond doubt. And Melbourne managed a few consolation goals, but the Dockers' relentless pressure and superior ball movement ensured they finished strong, closing out a comprehensive 50-point victory. Jacob Van Rooyen stood out as one of Melbourne's best players, working tirelessly in the ruck and forward line and finishing with 2 goals. Stephen May was resilient in defence, while Judd McVie and Trent Rivers tried hard in a beaten midfield. Jack Billings came on as a sub, made an immediate impact with 18 disposals and a goal. Melbourne coach Simon Goodwin acknowledged the team's struggles, particularly in the midfield, saying our midfield's ability to win the ball and defend contest areas needs improvement. We've got 6 days to prepare for the Giants, and we need to get our contest game back quickly. And the Demons, of course, must regroup with haste as they face the GWS Giants next week. With finals aspirations hanging in the balance, addressing their midfield and ruck deficiencies will be crucial. B-Man, I won't get any of the general comments. Let's move on. But so, B-Man, before you do a deep dive into your stats, we've once again had a comment from a Demonland poster, the Pearl, who you think is George. And once again, he has B-Man and his stats files in the crosshairs. The Pearl writes, no stats files this week, please. If B-Man asserts that Nibbler is one of our best in terms of the player ratings or has X number of pressure acts, I'm going to be violently sick. If you need to rely on stats, you are not watching the game. If you want to talk stats, tell me about fumbles, short steps before the contest, and preferring to tackle rather than having a crack at possessing the ball. I think that's all he had to say. Is there anything else? No. So once again, B-Man, you got the right of reply, and then you can delve into your stats.
Well, about half an hour ago, I was alerted to the fact that tonight's show was on at 7:30, not 8:30. So the Pearl will be very happy. No stats file tonight. No, only joking. The Pearl, but what I didn't have is a pithy response to the Pearl already ready to go. I thought I'll think of that at like 20 past 8. 7:30 came along. So
maybe next
just
week.
A query though, like a semantic thing, Pearl. If you want me to tell you about fumbles and what were the other categories you wanted me to tell you?
Fumble. Let's go back one sec, or one page back. Short steps before the contest and preferring to tackle rather than having a crack at possessing the ball.
And so how do I do that without some statistical like references? Do I say, I think I saw them take some short steps, kick the ball longer? I don't know. How do I, like the fumbles? I could give clangers for that one. That's easy. We could look into clangers. Look, as I said, just to sort of, I just defend myself. The Pearl is the, I find actually I watched the game. I never would look at the stats. Just only a little bit during the game, and good luck for you to be able to just do it all vibes based, but it really, really helps me understand the of what I've just watched and try to get a sort of context of what happened. And this game is a really good example of it because it helped me sort of get a good sense of how we lost it and where we lost it. And it's interesting because you mentioned player ratings, and the Pearl mentions player ratings, and Andy in the top in his outro gave a pump up to JVR, and I thought to myself, rightio, I actually didn't think he played that well. And that's I guess that's an example of the vibe-based thingo. So I had a quick look after Andy spoke at the player ratings for this game. And you could start here about why we lost in terms of using the stats to give a sense of why we lost in a very basic way. They were awesome. I thought I probably guilty of underestimating Freo, although I've been pumping them up for the last 2 or 3 years. I really rate Longmuir. Their system I thought was really terrific, but they blew us off the park. They played brilliantly. They ran us off the park. And that's reflected in the player rating vote. So the player rating, as I've talked about before, is each individual act is, I think I'm right in saying, is there's a score of 6 or -6. And it's highly valued, the player rating, because it's a measure of impact. So no one really looks at disposals anymore. They're not of any great value. It's about impact and what you do with disposals, impact in what you do with your interventions in the game. So every intervention, not just every kick, is scored, and that's where they come up with a rating. Anything over 20 is considered an elite game of footy. So I mentioned last week that Cozzy had 23 rating points last week, which was a magnificent performance by Cos last week. So any game over 20 is considered an elite game of footy. In this game, the top 10 rated players, 7 were Freo players. Number 1 was Sarong, who just carved us up all match with a player rating of 21.9. Andy Brayshaw was 21.5. And then again, I don't know this off the top of my head, but I would think there would be very few games of football where one team has a player scoring over 20 points in a game of footy on the player rating. Number 3 was Sean Darcy. And this might surprise some. For all the Harry Petty knockers, he was our highest rating player by a country mile, 17.6 on his player rating. His predicted rating, which is a measure that I'm reading it off Wheelo's stats, but these are champion data numbers, was 5.7 for this match based on history and his form. And so his player rating was phenomenal. And you wouldn't guess that just by the vibes best, or maybe you would. But, he had 15 disposals, 100% disposal efficiency. He was on the ground for 84% of the time. So he actually had a terrific game, Harry Petty, our best player. The next was Hayden Young. Jake O'Meara was next. Jordan Clark was next. And then we have to go all the way down to Trent Rivers for our next best player, who was only 13.8, and Jakey Melksham was number 12. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Of the top 10, only 2 were D's fans, 2, and none of them young players. So, I think that was really revealing. If you go the other way, speaking of Jacob Van Ruwen's performance, the bottom 3 rated players in this match were all demons, and as it turns out, all young players. The Colt had -2 player rating. Jacob Van Ruwen only had 0.6, so his predicted rating was 7. I really pumped up last week on the solo pod how many of our younger players rated above their predictive rating and that leadership. Well, it was completely the opposite this week, and it'll come out in the pressure numbers as well. So Jacob Van Ruwen predicted rating after a great game last week was 7, he 0.6, and Daniel Turner, his predicted rating was 5.8 and could only manage 1 point. So Rui really didn't have a great game. Time on ground, 75%, 12 kicks, but he only went at 64.7 disposal efficiencies for his disposal, inside 50s too. So not a great game, but, just looking at those numbers, they deserve, it goes without saying they deserve to win, but they were phenomenal. And they really got to work and ran us off our legs, and were, I thought, incredibly impressive performance from them. No, we shouldn't discount how well they played when we're thinking about this game. Looking at the stats files, last week I talked about the rise of the hybrid, and this game was really interesting, especially compared to last week, because it felt like we played a very similar model. And so we, again, looked to play very similar ways to we did to Essendon. I noted last week that Essendon and Freo have a lot of similarities in the way they like to play, and particularly their uncontested possessions and uncontested disposals, and the way they like to transition the ball with hands and spread the ground. And it seemed like in many ways we went into this game with a very similar tactical approach, which was a really high halfback press. Again, Jones was commentating this week, and I actually really enjoyed the commentary from a tactical perspective of him and Burgoyne this week. I thought they gave a good description of that, though. There's an issue that I'll flag in a sec, but defense, I thought we really got opened up obviously in that first quarter. I flagged last week that I had a concern with the Bombers, the ease at which they got some of those goals out of the back end last week, and that we really exposed ourselves with that high press. We were lucky last week to only, to go in, 1 point of difference at quarter time. Well, we weren't lucky this time, and the same issue raised its head today. In yesterday's game. So I thought our defense, to be fair to the defense, they're under incredible pressure, but having that, they just looked structurally all over the shop and couldn't get back on defense to set up behind the ball. Jones talked about the way that we historically always have that keeper, and they use May in the second half. Well, we didn't have that in the first half. Could he gone earlier to having that? I don't know. But that was I guess, sort of evidence that we were struggling with our defence when they went back to that model with May back. But we just couldn't cover their defence. They really opened us up, and it exposed some of the challenges that I flagged last week of defending a transition turnover game. Really exposes defences, and I mentioned Port, a good example. Brisbane are a good example. Pies a good example of high turnover transition teams that struggle defensively, and one of the big struggles is getting back. I thought one of the big differences in this game was their leg speed was just phenomenal and really hurt us. I thought we really struggled in terms of how good they were at covering the ground. It was another score over 100 points. They've, I think that's Andy is at 5 this season, so very unusual after only giving up 3 in 4 years. And they definitely deserved. They could have easily beaten us by more. Such was the game. Although I have to say, I thought we stuck to the task pretty well. Intercepts in terms of the defense, it was the first category. The score, they did well, obviously, to get the score that they did, but I thought our defense was probably at its worst game all season in some respects, though again, maybe that's being a bit tough on them given the ease at which the ball was being moved in. I just saw a couple of things I didn't like either, and one of which was Lever. He ended up in that last quarter, he ended up sort of caught between two players, and it was the goal, I think, I forget who it was, one of the small forwards kicked a goal where it was clear if he left that player, the player was going to, the ball was going to get tic-tacked over his head. And that's what he did. He allowed it. And I don't see that very often, where he almost said, well, no one's going to cover my player behind it. I think it was Walters. And he went to the player with the ball when he had never had a chance of getting to the player with the ball. But it was a bit like, well, I'm not going to be the one who Walters kicks a goal on me. I didn't like that. I thought Lever didn't have a great game at all, really. In the marks as intercepts, not too bad, actually. Last week it was 87 to 89, and intercept marks we were +2. This week we had 8 more intercepts than them, so that was all right. Intercept marks, we 15 to 16, so we were +2 last week and 1 down this week. Surprised me a little bit that we did okay on intercept marks because we were woeful on turnover, and we didn't generate much from those intercept marks or those intercepts. Marks inside 50, last week we took 8, they took 13. This week we took 13, but they took 21, and predominantly they were the easy marks they got when they beat us on the break and had free players inside 50. But that's a lot of marks to give up inside 50, indicative of how effective they were on the transition. Contested possession, a lot of talk about contested possession. Shout out again to Willow. He was quoted in an article, it's on Demonland, but ABC, if you look at ABC News, I forget it's Cody, I forget the two authors, but ABC does a really good series of articles about analytics. And this week the discussion was on contested possession using Willow's data that exploring what it was. And I thought actually it was worthwhile in these numbers to remind people or to tell people what contested possessions are, because it's sort of a bit confusing in some respects. Contested possession, the definition, I forget the exact definition, but Champion Data, to paraphrase, it's when the ball is in dispute, when neither team have the ball and the ball's in dispute. It's not actually physically winning it, the ball every time. So it's made up of hard ball get is a contested possession, or loose ball get when the ball's in dispute. Contested mark, contested knock-on, a free for, they're all types of possessions. And again, as I said last week, sometimes possessions get confused with disposals. Disposals are kicks and handballs. Last week, we had a phenomenal amount of contested possessions, 142 to win that count to that by 7. This week, as Goody was, he looked aghast in that presser, I have to say, just watched it before. 105 only we had this week to 142 the previous week. They had 141. We were down 36 for contested possessions, which is a complete and utter nightmare for us for a footy team that bases its model on contest. You could argue that's where we lost the game right there. And speaking about what the Pearl talked about, well, we weren't fighting hard enough. Well, that's where you see it in the contested numbers. Post clearance contested number were really interesting. We hard ball get down 3, loose ball get up 3, down 3 for contested marks. And they had, this was a funny stat, in terms of contested possessions, they had 5 more free kicks post clearance than us, which hurt 7-12. This one was a really interesting one, and is, the pre-clearance goes to their domination that Andy noted up at the top of the show. One of the pre-clearance numbers is gather from hit out. So these are, again, contested possessions. So all the different types of ways of getting a possession when the ball's in dispute. A gather from a hit out, we had 0. They had 16. They were plus 16 for gather from a hit out in pre-clearance, and that's before the ball, before a stoppage. And that says a lot, really. Ruck hard ball get was plus 5 for Freo, and loose ball get, they were plus 4 as well. I thought this was really telling. Inside our forward 50, they had 6 more hard ball gets than us inside our forward 50. It really, our pressure inside 50 dropped off, which when I get to the pressure numbers was curious because Cozzy had one of his highest pressure ratings for the season. But, I thought Frida was not great inside 50. I thought generally our pressure was poor. I thought Disco Turner and JVR, as I noted from their ratings, were both average inside 50. We only could take 1 contested mark inside 50. We couldn't gather from a hit out. They did that 3 times, and they got 2 more free kicks for us. So they had 18 more contested possessions inside our forward 50, which is and 6 more loose ball gets. So that really tells a big tale. They wanted the ball more, and when the ball hit the ground inside our 50, we just weren't very good at getting it back or winning it back. So really poor from that perspective. The pressure was really interesting because it was almost very similar to last week. The overall rating was 177. Remember, 188 is considered average. They were only 161. So we were plus 16 for pressure. Talked about this last week about Essendon's style, and it was similar with Docker's style. When they spread the ball, by definition, you're going to get less physical contest, so your pressure numbers are all going to be down. But we were plus 20 in the first quarter, 168 to 148. That's a big differential, particularly, in the way that they sort of dominated that quarter. But, the effort was there. The second quarter, it really dropped off 149 to 148. I really like this. So as much as Andy's right and that they got on their bike in the third quarter, I thought we, really worked hard in the second half. And I wouldn't want that to be lost in the disappointment of the game. So 195, our pressure rating was in the third quarter. It got over 200 for a big chunk of that quarter to their 159. So we were plus 36 for pressure in that quarter and 171 to 161 plus 16 in the last quarter. So I thought that was impressive effort from the Ds in that second half to stick at it and to keep applying pressure. It does raise that. It's a really interesting thing how that outside run means lower pressure ratings. Last week I talked about this, how pumping up the young players last week and the leadership they showed, and it was reflected in the pressure stats last week. The top 5 were Trent Rivers, Andy Menzies, Wakefield. Nibbler was the only senior player in the top 5. Colt, and then Harrison Petty. This week, barely a young player in sight. Well, Kate Chandler, I guess, Cozzy. So number 1 was Cozzy. Kate Chandler was number 2. Then Nibbler, Sparrow, and Clayton Oliver. Windsor was 9th this week after, I think, being 7th or 6th last week. Rivers was 8th this week after topping it last week. And AMW, who was 2nd last week, really fell away and was 13th for most pressure. And, it really goes to, I think, the challenge of having a team with so many young players in it. The challenge for getting those, both for the individual players, but also for the high performance team, getting young players being able to back up consistency of performance is one of the key markers of having good senior depth. And we've got such a young young group. It's a big ask for them to back up week after week, and that's definitely a challenge. I talked about this last week. There's been a real upswing in our ground ball gets. So we were, the outlier minus 10 after our bye against the Roos, but then we were plus 11 against the Lions, plus 20 against the Eagles, and plus 15 last week against the Bombers for a ground ball gets. We reverted back to this. We only won 84 ground ball gets. Again, I think we weren't, running as hard as they spread brilliantly, I thought, but we were down 4 for ground ball gets in this game. as I noted last week, it used to be a real key indicator for us, and it looked like we were getting back on track. This was probably reflective of our lack of sort of ability to cover them and to get across and do the things that we did it well against Essendon. We weren't able to do that in terms of stopping their ability to move the ball so quick, but they were getting to those ground ball gets and we weren't. So tackles inside 50, last week we laid 56 tackles in total, 10 inside 50. So this week the numbers weren't too bad, which again goes to, I think our effort was all right. So tackles, we laid 50 tackles this week and we had 14 tackles inside 50. So, that's interesting in terms of how that doesn't marry up with the contested possession numbers inside our 50. So here we get to the clearance numbers. So against the Dons last week, we were +3 for just raw total clearances, +9 for stoppage clearances. It was not the case in this game. So for centre clearances, just in raw numbers, we were down 9, so 8-17, and we were down 22 for stoppage clearances, 8-30. And I don't know this, but if I went back, I would be pretty confident that's the biggest differential we've had this season. And I suspect it'd be one of the biggest differentials in Simon Goody's career at the D's in terms of stoppage, losing that many stoppages, 30-8. It's really interesting, that definitely, that was discussed a few weeks ago, definitely it gives them an advantage in territory, but they didn't really get a huge advantage in scoring. I think I'll come to it in a sec, but it wasn't a complete mauling from scores from clearances. Last week, Jones talked about bringing an extra to the stoppage, and I was sort of trying to, as a way, and also bring the high half forwards to the stoppage to create congestion around the stoppage to mitigate the impact of not having a ruck. And that was very effective last week, as indicated by the numbers of only, we were +9 for stoppage clearances. He said that we did the same thing this week and in the second half, but I just saw a post on Demonland that noted and had screenshots that we didn't actually do it very well in the first half, or if we did, we weren't following instructions. And then it wasn't till the second half that we actually used that tactic that we used so effectively last week against the Dons of pressing up and bringing the high half forwards to the contest, to make it difficult for Freo, just like we did to the Bombers, to chain it out from those contests. That really was the game. They got it out from that contest so easily. And then once they got out into the open space, just like the Bombers were trying to do, they really cut us up, just like the Bombers did when they got it out to space. So, that was definitely a tactical fail by Goody. If they didn't do this, what they worked last week, if they didn't start doing that to the second half of the game, that was a real struggle for us. They had 38 more hit-outs. We only had 9 hit-outs to 47. It's like you're not going to – that's a shellacking in anyone's definition. We had a bagel of hit-outs to advantage. So we had 0 hit-outs to advantage and they had 17. And so in some respects, it's amazing they didn't towel us up more on the scoreboard from clearances, but just the raw numbers look very ugly. And again, as was discussed last week, one of the major benefits of all of winning so much of those clearances is the territory, and they smashed us in territory, forward half, inside forward half, inside 50, time in forward half. Contested marks wasn't too bad given their 2 big tools, 8-11, down 3. This was really where the game was when I lost a transition from the back half. My theory of this game is that we're trying to implement this hybrid method, this new way of playing for Goody and for this team, that more turnover game, more transition. Well, we came up against a team who have been doing this for 3 years and they completely schooled us in this model and showed the challenge that we've got. Daniel Hoyne on the ESPN footy podcast, they looked at Melbourne this week and they discussed that Melbourne are bottom 4 for scores from transition from back half and bottom 4 for defending points from or scores from the opposition back half. So those two together, make it very challenging to be one of the best teams in the AFL at the moment. Swans are number 1 in that category and Freo are number 2 in that category. We're at the opposite end of the table, and I think it really highlights the challenge that we've got in implementing this new method. In the Dons game, we scored 24 points from the back half. Season average, we're averaging 32.3. We gave up 32 points. So I flagged last week that, and our season average was 29.7. It's jumped up considerably. I flagged last week that would be real concern to Goody, and subsequently heard that data around being bottom four, which didn't surprise me. In this game, we could only manage 27 points from the back half. Our season average is 32, but we gave up 64 points from our back half against a season average of 31.6. So over double our season average. And that just really, for me, that just described the game perfectly. We just could not stop them moving the ball from the back half. A big part of that was, I think, our defensive system really broke down, and we were not getting across to cover. I said in the pod last week, it was critical that we get across and cover on the switch and make sure that they couldn't just play on. And it was like a repeat of the Alice game. We just let them do it in the Alice, and we let them do it in this game. So scores from turnover. So the other scoring, we actually scored 2 goals, 1 from kick in this week, which was interesting. So we only scored 27 points from our back half, but 13 of which were from a kick out, which I thought was kind of curious. Our season average for scores from turnover is 49, or 48.9, I should say. They scored 85 points. A plus 44 differential is Freo's equal season high against any team for the differential from scores from turnover. So equal season high, unfortunately for the Demons, is the other one where they scored 44 points was our game in the Alice. So they murdered us from scores from turnover. And so we can talk about the scores from stoppages, all we like, but really the game was lost there. But scores from stoppages, so we're only 1 point difference from centre bounces. And if you'd ask people again, the Pearl, I'd say, well, if how impactful, Pearl, were Freo in the centre bounce? And they killed us. Well, they only scored 6 points. We scored 1 more point from centre bounces than they did. So again, it's not about the raw numbers, it's about the impact. But as I said before, they got territory with those clearances. And stoppages around the ground, they were 21 to... what am I saying? That was the Bombers. So they, from stoppages around the ground, was 1-6 to 23. So 17 plus 17 for scores from stoppages around the ground. They were -2 for centre bounces. So we scored 1-6. We were -2, I should say. 1 goal 6, and they scored 1 goal 2-8. So we almost matched them for centre bounce. It was around the ground stoppages, but still, so -19 for that game. If you just looked at the raw numbers, which they kept on talking about in the coverage, just the raw numbers of clearances, they smashed us, but could only get a 19-point differential from that. So the main benefit they got was, of course, territory, and that's a big factor, because when they did turn the ball over, when we turned the ball over, I should say, it turned over in really dangerous places because they won that territory battle. So I'm not discounting how important it was for this game about their ruck dominance, but I think it's interesting that they could only turn that ruck dominance and that complete smashing on the raw numbers into a +19 from scores from stoppages, centre bounce, and round the ground stoppages. But really, the game was lost on turnover. 85 points, 13 goal 7, 80 points, 44-point differential is that's not going to get it done come finals. So that's a real concern for the D's. Just finally, fitness. Again, as I touched on it, I think there's a real challenge with having a young group and keeping them up every week. And so, I think it's not a shock that we struggle in some of those young players struggle coming up against but sort of coming back from last week. And so let's see how we go this week. I really hope we get a bounce this week, and it might be that we're going to have to put up with that waxing and waning of ability for those young players to play week in, week out footy. Hopefully we get Maxi back on board next week.
All right, thank you, B-Man. And I just want to another thank you to B-Man for stepping up to the plate over the last 2 weeks while I was away. B-Man, thank you very much. Really appreciate that, and I'm really happy.
No worries, and a good thing I got in my ode to Goody last week, because I may not have been able to get it in again. And correction, so thanks. I think it's Watson 11 to correct, is that I totally take full responsibility. I should never have got a work experience student to come in and do my work for me. is that I said that there were 14 players who had won more than who had coached more than 150 games and won a flag and a better than 50% winning ratio. It was pointed out on Demon Land that it's actually 32, one of which was Checker, Hughes and Bomber Thompson. So I blame AI for that as well.
Hasn't the praise of Goody hasn't aged well.
Well, as I just wrote on Demon Land, is that I wasn't talking about the victory over the Bombers. I was talking about his 7 years of senior coach of the Melbourne Football Club.
I'm also happy to have a decent microphone backup. I had nothing with me, and trying to record audio in a bathroom effectively didn't go well. So, but thank you, Big Man, for stepping up to the plate so we could at least put something out there. For the last 2 weeks. Thank you. Let's get into our listener questions. Magnus says, hi, gents. What does Freo know that the other teams haven't figured out? For example, why do we play so badly against them? Sam6172 says, hi, guys. What is it specifically that has turned Fremantle into our kryptonite? Seems to get the better of us over the last few years. Coaching, personnel, plan, or are they just too good? As a WA-based D's fan, I'm very keen for us to get a comfortable win against them. I will, however, happily admit their supporters are much better than the Eagles, a much more pleasant game day experience. The taciturn demon says, how can it happen twice? How do you publicly say throughout the week we lost in every facet of the game last time, but contest was the worst part, and then get obliterated in the contest? Sweeper Northy says, the same problems we encountered when playing Freo in the Northern Territory resurfaced yesterday. When at their best, the Dockers midfield is dynamic. It also runs deep. Whilst we might not like to admit it, Brayshaw, Sarong, Young, Fife, O'Meara, plus Jackson and Darcy are superior to our current midfield group. Yes, Gawn and Petrarca will make a big difference when fit, and Clary, with a full pre-season under his belt, should result in a much better output in 2025. But at the moment, our midfield doesn't stack up with the best in the league. Reviewing our engine room over the off-season and adding to our mix will be critical. That also means considering how we replace Rivers at half-back to allow him to become a permanent mid. I like the fact that we've been linked to Isaac Cummings, GWS, and Dan Houston, Port Adelaide, to address that important need. And if we can add to our midfield depth, we can also return A and B to half forward when we've really missed his pressure. And finally, Monoculus says, thanks, guys, for all your hard work in getting these fabulous podcasts together. I just love them after a win. Of course, less so after a loss. However, I'm really looking forward to this one. Why does Freo seem to have our number, even previously when we have been playing well? Is it just their pace, run and link that mesmerises our midfield and completely destroys our usually solid defence? They seem to just run it out with someone going past them, then a forward running well deep of our zone over and over again. Is their coach some sort of wizard who takes our game plan apart on a regular basis? Or perhaps we're just not as good as we have believed. The past fortnight, we did seem to be getting it together, and I was starting to subscribe to the loading training planning for the July, August, September surge, but it now looks more and more, despite my optimism that September will be irrelevant. And we got a voicemail from Rosestar that came in late.
G'day, guys. Rosestar here again. Sorry, we're just so appreciate it. But first of all, I want to say thank you to Bin Man for holding up your end of the bargain the last 2 weeks. And Andy, I think you can piss off back overseas, mate, because since you've been back, that wasn't a great showing, was it? Look, to get beaten the same way was pretty disappointing. I thought I'd just see if you guys had any thoughts on sort of why. They've kicked the two biggest scores against us in the Goody era. Not just this year, which it has been this year, but that's been since Goody was coach. So pretty crazy to think how they do it. And we did arrest the flow this time, but we still lost every quarter. So that was pretty crazy. But to get beaten the same way is disappointing. When you get Brayshaw, Sarong, Young, the most posies, just outworked us all game, didn't he? And then giving the forwards so many looks out the back, and I guess that's the question: why do they get so many looks out the back? Is it just speed on the ball that they provide? Look, hard to know exactly much to take away from it. I mean, I thought Billings, although, he's the whipping boy, actually did okay. He just can't kick over 30 metres. And Colt was probably rightly subbed out, just a bit undisciplined. And look, he looked frustrated, and good to see he cared at least. Milkshake was, I guess, the forward, the target up there, but I don't know. Don't know. What do we do? Move on to the Giants next week and see how we go there, and try not to lose that one. Otherwise, I think it's probably curtains if we lose next week. But
Rostar fell victim to the 2-minute time limit. So just a reminder, anyone calls in, you got 2 minutes, get it in quick. Short and succinct is best. George, are we Freo's bunnies, or would we have lost to anybody yesterday the way we played?
We're not just Freo's bunnies, we'll be further bunnies to come. These Freo games were pretty typical of the way we've played in the last 6 to 8 weeks, even 8 weeks. People are too easy to forget that we beat North Melbourne by 3 points. We fell over the line against the Eagles. Essendon kicked the last 4 goals of the game, if I remember. When we had a 7-goal lead. Our team does not look fit at the moment, and we were exposed by a younger, fitter side yet again in this particular game, particularly the talent that Fremantle have in the midfield. Just have a look at those names: Sarong, Young, Brayshaw. They're all 23. Darcy's 26, Jackson's 22. They absolutely pantsed us in the middle and around, and more importantly around the ground. We looked slow. Our half forwards were just appalling. There was a reason why the half forwards and our mids are slow. They looked unfit. There was a reason why the ball finished up in the defensive areas so quickly, is because there was no pressure whatsoever being put on the Fremantle players as they picked the ball up, usually at the other end of the ground, and particularly in this game when we gave it to them courtesy of turnovers. They took full advantage of the situation, but they are young and fit. I said a couple of weeks ago, we do not look fit at all. I think there's been an almighty cock-up in the training regime. Players look dead on their feet right from the start of the game. And this was just another example of it. We'll get more of the same next week. Don't be confused by the Essendon game that was played in the wet, and we were able to get lots of bodies around the ball and stop them moving the ball. If that was in the dry, we would have lost that game easily as well. And again, in that game, we gave them the last 4 goals after us having a 7-goal lead. We're just not as good as what we've been led to believe. We're not as good as 2021. Our players are all older. Our talent's all older. The younger players that we've recruited, some of them look promising, but they're not the replacements for the players that we had that won a premiership in 2021. I'm afraid, folks, that we're in for a bit of pain to come. Our list isn't as good as what people might think. I know there's a lot of people have contrary views to that, but I think we've got some very good parallels with a couple of other sides in the competition who are down at the bottom of the ladder at the moment. So, both Mono and Swoop and Northy got it right. We've got a lot more going on. I don't know what's going on in terms of the coaching staff. I don't blame Goody. He was furious in that presser of his when he said we set up to negate because we had no ruck. Well, that wasn't evident at all in this particular game. And as Binman said, it took us till half time to actually get the numbers to the ball, and the number of times, even on the centre bounces, where our players were standing off the Fremantle players just to see them dance out of the centre and do what they wanted. We'll talk about the other bit of the recruiting, but it wasn't a very pleasant scene to watch, but I think we're going to be in for a lot more of that.
All right. Lazy says, what cost us the game? Negative 32 clearances or scores from turnover? I believe no matter what game style you play, getting belted in clearances like that, it puts you on the back foot in any game. You don't win too many games with that figure. I will say that the pressure that Freo brought was off the charts, and while we're not the best in executing under pressure, we failed miserably to prevent some of the turnovers that they scored off. Logue's response saying the effort of contest was pathetic. Gaundy the Great, and the irony of that username posting a question on this week of all weeks. Gaundy the Great says, were the hitouts really to blame? We got smashed in a similar way the last time with Gawn, so it is our stoppage. So is it our stoppage structure? What specifically is going wrong here? Spirit of Norm Smith says, other clubs can set midfield defensively when Gawn is a dominant ruckman. Why couldn't we? We got smashed. We couldn't set up to stop them coming out the front through stoppages or from the centre square. Clearance, spread, run, Freo goal. And finally, Clintosaurus says, was this one of those games where we were not fully wound up, to quote Big Man? One thing I noticed is their mids were on the move at every stoppage, which would be expected as they were winning all the taps. Not much movement from ours. Would have expected some to try and shark a few, but hardly any. So, Big Man, any defence of our impotent midfield, or are we just... we don't have Gawn, we don't have Petrarca, Brayshaw, he's gone.
Well, I think to George nailed a couple of things is it should not be discounted how well they played and how well they're going. Some of their leg speed was just terrific. There is it was good. I watched it just an hour or so ago, and he wasn't a happy camper. And I thought, to be honest, he was a bit tough on Fullerton, because there was a question about, he said a couple of times, we don't have another ruck who would have won hitouts. And there was a double implication there, I thought, is that was putting Fullerton in a bit. And he did point out, almost word for word what I said on the podcast last week, is that Fullerton hasn't been able to win rucks at VFL level, ruck tap-outs. His point was that they had no one else who's going to win tap-outs, and so therefore the plan was structural, which I thought, so that question there about structural, I think there was a structural failing. They didn't have it set up properly. It's hard to tell whether the high half forwards, they did try to crowd it, but that photo, the pictures, the screenshots that are on the stats file thread on Demonland, pretty good evidence that they didn't until the second half. And in the second half, I thought that was when was our best part of the game. We were quiet, as I said, our pressure rating was good in the third quarter, and we seemed to make it more difficult for them to get it out into space. Are we fit enough? I don't know. I think that definitely that was the worst sort of evidence of Clary's fitness. I thought he was given he played behind a lot of time. He wasn't man on man. His energy looked really low. I think as I just noted before, it's a big ask for those young players to back up, and that's where our leg speed is. AMW is our fastest player, and a couple of times his leg speed was really impressive. Windsor too. But both of them were down in terms of their coverage of the ground. And the other big one in the last 2 weeks, in our 2 wins leading into this game, the Colt was our highest rated runner, and he was not the player he was in the last couple of weeks, that's for sure. So, that they definitely look, as George noted, they look incredibly fit. They've had good leg speed for 2 or 3 years. Our setups in the middle, they're definitely a structural issue. Petty, I thought was, his effort was fantastic, but he's no classical ruckman, is he? That's for sure. And again, it's a young player asking Van Rooyen to, he just couldn't, as I said, from the player ratings, that was his worst performance of the year almost in terms of his rating.
Well, it's funny you say that. Everyone on Demonland that gave votes in our Vote Player of the Year thread, he was in the top 3 of, we have 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
He was in the top 3.
I haven't looked at that. I find that really surprising. And again, it's probably a good example of why it's important to look at the numbers, because nothing at the numbers scream he had a good game. And he definitely didn't in the ruck. But what I would say, and maybe this is where the votes came from, he still made an effort, and he's a young fella, and he's been thrown to the wolves by having to ruck all season and then take the ruck against 2 of the best ruckmen in the AFL. So, I think obviously it's a bit different if we've got Maxi back in there. And actually, one of the interesting things about Maxi, and there's been lots of talk in the last couple of weeks about ruckman and their value, is where a point that's been made about Maxi, actually, which is sort of inferred in one of those questions, is his value is in his tap ruck work, because they're really not that influential anymore. Hit-outs to an advantage are so rare, they're just not really that influential. It's what his clearance is, his ability to win his own clearances, and that's what Jackson did well. I thought he won his own clearances, and being a player who can win contested possessions. Once the ball left the area, we were chasing tail. Part of that was structure, though, definitely structure. I also think, to be honest, they made a tactical error setting up that defense so aggressively like they did against the Bombers because, like George suggests, when the Bombers were in that first quarter last week, they could have easily put a gap on us on the scoreboard. We looked like we were chasing tail once they got the ball out in the open last week. I would have, they went in with almost exactly the same game plan, it looked like. I would have loved it if we'd played a bit deeper and gone back to our forward half, and slow the game down, contested footy style. But, the pace of the game was, we struggled with, that's for sure.
Couple of things. Gawn's, it's his marking around the ground as well that we missed. Not saying that would have changed anything this week, but there were a few times when the ball was kicked either way that we just didn't have a big player to mark. But
and flexibility, because the thing is that he gives Goody such good tactical flexibility, because he could have put him back in defence. He could have swapped him in and been a dangerous forward when we were struggling to get the ball there. The drop-off intensity in the running, I mean, George is right. That question about whether we're fit enough, it's hard to argue that we are fit enough. I'm hoping, of course, that we're on the upward trajectory still, and this game doesn't dissuade me from that particularly. I just think there's a real challenge with young players getting up. Having so many of our players in this team, almost 50% of our players 22 and under, getting up week in, week out, particularly when you're asking a player like JVR to smash into the wall, the ruck every time, 15, 20, 30 times a game.
Just as equally, though, Bin Man, I think a lot of our senior players look very, very slow in this game.
Well, that's a point you've made a lot before. They are slow, aren't they? But Clary looks super slow, didn't he?
He's obviously unfit, but people like Melcham, who can barely get out of a trot. Yeah, it's not surprising the ball comes out of the half forward line really quickly. Fritter doesn't run hard at all.
Had another average game.
Jack Viney is not fast and never has been. Can't expect him to be.
No.
We've got two younger players in Petty and JVR being absolutely knocked senseless in the middle. They can't be expected to chase tail. And
you're right. And in this game too, I don't know what you guys thought, but Cos looked off.
Oh, he only got 6 possessions in the whole game.
And he just didn't look. He just didn't look right. Like his body language was poor, I thought.
He looked lively early, and then I didn't notice him for a long time.
And he wasn't doing it like last week. One of the themes of last week was our rundown tackling, and that wasn't evident. So you're right, George. Our senior players have always been slow, and I think that question about what's Freo's kryptonite, they got to be the fastest team in the AFL. Maybe Hawthorn or Freo. They're phenomenal. How quick they are. I forget the what's the number 32 for them? The not Walt
Young.
No. African player.
Fredericks or the
Fredericks. His pace, they showed footage of him. Basically, he ran the length of the ground, and when he had already run a fair way, and we couldn't go with him. And there was another one where Lever, so speaking of senior players who aren't that quick over the ground, I thought Lever had a very average game. And there was a goal that Tracy kicked where it was a brilliant end-to-end goal by them, and their ball movement was phenomenal. But you could see what was happening, and Tracy ran into open space, almost started with Lever, and Lever just could not go with him. That's probably no shock against Tracy, but he's a younger fella. But you're right, George, that our senior players' leg speed is, and then you add May. May's not quick, is he? So, no.
The other factor that we haven't really looked at is we've got so many players playing out of their proper positions, trying to fill holes at the moment. Because Gawn's not there, we've got Petty and JVR, who should be up the forward line kicking goals for us instead of having to compete against monster rucks, and 2 of them at that. Even Cozzy, I can't recall that he played any time in the forward half. He was constantly around the ball because we had to. We've got Rivers, who's our best driver from the half back line, playing in the midfield. we're just plugging holes all over the ground at the moment with players out of position. It's not surprising that we get the results. But, yeah, I still think we do not look fit at all for this time of the season in particular.
And if we're not, then both of your predictions will be correct. So we'll certainly get a better gauge on it next week. But
I'll give you the number of good travel agents, and you can book something. We're starting to convert you. Buck Necked says, "Wow, we just had our pants pulled down, outworked and outplayed all day. Can you comment on our newfound fragility? Previously, our defence would be in place and we were hard to score against. On Sunday, they got so many goals over the back, suggesting we played too high and didn't run back hard enough. We may have a game that stands up in finals, but playing like that, we have no chance of making it." Spirit Norm Smith says, "Out the back, why did we concede 13 goals from turnovers and the 5 goals for Freo by forwards being all alone in the forward 50, defenders playing 15 metres off their players? Why? How?" Ben says, "Why do we press up so high? A footy ground is much bigger than a basketball court, and I don't think we have the fitness to execute this properly. Last line of defence shouldn't be halfway up the ground." Buckneckered responds, "The old method had us being almost impossible to get the ball past the last 80 metres. Teams could burn through plus 20 inside 50s for no benefit. Now all the back 6 press way up, meaning over the back goals are simple if you run hard the other way against the Ds. May and Lever do not defend well this way. They are so much better when the ball is coming at them. If everyone presses up and we lose the contest, which we did all day, then a few slick overlap passes and an easy deep inside 50 entry and goal awaits. This method only works if we dominate contest and don't turn it over in easy spots." So George, the defence at times seemed to be a shambles, but this was inevitable given Freo's quick ball movement. Anything about the way we press up too high, or did for this game?
I've been waiting to say this to George. You're on mute, George.
Oh, George.
There we go. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think it was all summed up in Buck Necked's last sentence. Don't turn it over in easy spots. There were 13 goals that came from turnovers. You really can't blame the defence when we give 13 goals worth away up the field, particularly to a side that is fit and capable and just run. Looking at the defence just from the defensive structures, we might have been playing up a little bit higher than what we normally did because we had to. We had to get more bodies up and around the ball that we were trying to do. But it's not surprising when you turn it over at that half-forward line and it goes back the other way, you're going to go straight over the top of the defenders. The first thing is don't turn it over. And the second thing is, once again, where were the half forwards and where were the mids that were stopping that transition? They just Fremantle sailed through the middle of the ground, unhindered, absolutely unhindered, the whole length of the ground. So it's not surprising. I'm not blaming the defenders. The defensive structure depends on it being slowed as it comes into the defence. You can't expect otherwise with fast movement. Collingwood won a premiership on that basis last year of moving the ball quickly so that the defence can't set up. In this game, we didn't have that at all, and we're missing our talent up the field. Once again, we don't look fit to be able to stop that sort of run, and that's the consequences you get.
I agree totally that what we were missing in this game that we had in spades against Essendon was our all-team defence was chalk and cheese between the 2 weeks. So last week we were covering, we were slowing the ball movement, we were getting across the mark against the Bombers. They were very similar methodologies that the two teams used, and this week we couldn't get across. The Optus Oval is even more circular than the MCG, and the Dockers did a great job of using the complete width of it, but clearly looking to exploit our lack of run. And so I totally agree that you can't blame the back six. You know, it's an all-team defence, pressure on the ball carrier, but also not turning it over in challenging spots. But we're definitely in the last couple of weeks, George, definitely playing much higher and much more aggressive up the ground against the Bombers and Freo. No doubt about it. In this game, there's no question. So those questions are really good. For me, those three questions are the game in a nutshell, really, and it also points to a few challenges, one of which is, we've had a particular method for 3-4 years under Goody, and our defence is, as George has noted and we've talked about a lot, is all based on structure, role, everyone knowing where they're supposed to be in that system. And just this year, we're trying all different methods of that. And one of them is playing up much more high half press. And what happened to us is exactly what's happening to Collingwood at the moment. They can't get back on D when it gets turned over. They don't have the leg speed or the run or whatever you want to call it to get back and cover. In times gone past, we've solved that dilemma by, if we do turn the ball over, we're always set behind the ball. But we've got May up at the middle of the ground, and as Jones pointed out in the coverage, it wasn't to the second half that they changed that a little bit and went back to what Jones would have been used to when he was playing at Melbourne, of that sort of diamond defence with the goalkeeper at the back of that structure. It really does point to one of the challenges, forgetting, any of where we're at, the challenges of implementing a new method. And I think in a funny way, we saw the opposite for Freo. Freo have been using a variation of this method for the last 3 seasons. And they looked like they knew where they were supposed to be at any given time. They looked like they were on the same page. And for the first time in a long time, it looked like we didn't, where there was some finger pointing down back and there was people not running to the right place. But your point's a good one, George, about, you can't just put that on the defence. That's partly also on Goody for going into this game with that style, rolling the dice on it, if you like, but also to do with, not getting help from the midfielders and the high half forwards and the half-back flank, putting massive pressure on the ball carrier to cough it up. But, again, I keep coming back. This is the theme for years now, is that I keep coming back to a lot of our turnovers. Of course, they were to do with the pressure that Freo were putting on us, but a lot of them were just technically terrible kicks. So we gave up the ball too often when we just, kicked to them, basically. And it doesn't matter what game plan you've got. If you've got too many players with poor kicking technique, you're going to expose yourself to giving up turnovers. But and what Freo did, as you pointed out, George, the key was they hurt us. They turned it over and went hard, went quick, went wide. And I thought it was tactically it was curious that they didn't go back to a more traditional D's Goodwin defensive system or structure until it was too late, basically.
Travi14 says, good to have you back, gents, while Goody should be commended for the ruck decisions against the Bombers in the wet. He also needs to be condemned for 0 rucks against Jackson and Darcy in WA in perfect conditions. The ball was dry this week, so they could use the hit-out advantage. Spirit of Norm Smith says, so we lost Jackson and recruited Grundy. We then traded away Grundy after a short experiment. Problem 2024. Why no plan for a backup ruck to support Gawn, or a plan B for when and if Gawn gets injured? That's poor list management, poor coach management. Magnus says, can we say our ruck experiment is over and we need to cough up dollars during the off-season, or get Varel and Fullerton up to the learning curve fast? So, B-Man, is Travi14 right? Goody was hard last week for the ruck decision in the wet conditions, but should we be condemned this week for not utilising a ruck? Do we even have a backup ruck that could compete against 2 guns in dry conditions? Is the Grundy trade one of the worst trades in our history, given we don't have a backup for Max? Are our mids and or our coaches to blame for not setting up for being dominated in the hit-outs? And I'll take my answer off the air.
You take your say again?
I'll take my answer off the air. It's classical radio caller-in's comment.
Right. The first question, it's an interesting one, because the forecast was for it to be wet all week. And the irony was I was wanting it to be wet, because I think George's point's a good one around it's sort of one of the advantages mitigating their advantage last week against the Bombers was it was wet and slippery, and so when you bring extras and make congestion, you get good value for your congestion dollars, so to speak. And so I couldn't believe it when it was dry. So that we can add dry to one of the conditions Melbourne don't play well in. It's like spongy grass, wet. So look, again, it's a little bit about the question of, we only were down, what did I say? Down 14 points for scores from stoppages. So it's not really about, apart from the territory, that's definitely a point, but it's about impact. So I think, that points to the comments that George made before is where was our structure? Where was our setup? Did they get that right this week? There's definitely that there. Goody was furious on the weekend and in the presser. And as I said, I feel like he put, it was a bit unfair on Fullerton. It felt to me like he was throwing him under the bus a little bit, and which I didn't love. But his point remains a valid one, is that, if you're not dominating at the ruck level in VFL, how are you going to go against Darcy? Or, would have he given us anything more? I don't think on Fullerton. And Varel's not fit enough. And so what do? Put another slow bloke in there who's not yet ready. Varel probably would have been a better. Well, I personally would select Varel ahead of Fullerton because he's a genuine ruck, Varel, but he's not dominating at VFL level either. So he probably, to be fair, Goody, if he was going to pot Fullerton, he should have potted both of them, because neither of them would get close to the best VFL ruck team, would they, George?
No, and I think Varel's got a better future, but Varel's probably not going to make it at AFL level because I think he's only 198.
Well, he's not. That's what I mean. So he's he's not even that big. Yeah. I reckon he's definitely got a future. But I reckon he's a good 12 months, 2 years away.
Yeah.
So, that's why Goody was so ready for those questions, and I think he was angry and so not happy, and so I'm not really that was not one of his more impressive performances, I have to say, Goody, in terms of the presser.
But he was honest, wasn't he? At the end of the day,
exactly. He almost said exactly what I said last week on the podcast. Is, well, come on, what do you expect? The guy, if you can't dominate at VFL level, like VFL is such a drop off from AFL now. Yeah, I watched the game on the weekend. I thought, come on, it's like really. Frankston, Casey, it looked like a game from the 80s at VFL level. If you cannot dominate at that level, what's Darcy going to do to you? And so I thought Petty was, as I said, these player rating, he was our second highest rated player. So as for the talk about, I think it is a good question. Could have we had a better ruck, in terms of our list management? But again, I get a little bit list management's not really my area, or not at my area of expertise at all. And I'm amazed people who know, like George and others on Demonland, who have got really good knowledge about players coming up and all of that stuff. I don't even pretend to know about it. But what I do know is that we got Bruce, for instance. So how long does a player you bring in Bruce who's going to play at VFL level for the whole season with the opportunity to fill in for Max when he's injured for 2 or 3 weeks? Or someone I mentioned, what's the big player that Bombers got?
Goldstein.
Right, well, is Goldstein going to see out his career, playing second fiddle to Maxi? So there's not like there's a surfeit of AFL ready blokes kicking around the country in seconds or even in other AFL team who want to come to Melbourne and play at Casey. I mean, so I get that challenge. Burrell's part of the answer. Personally, I think that ultimately Maxi's sort of a bit of a rod to our own back, but we might end up going, the question is, I think it's a legitimate question. It's how influential are really elite rucks? So maybe Varel's a view to the future. The Grundy thing, I find that really, to be honest, really frustrating, the criticism the club gets for Grundy. So we tried it. Last year we did exactly that. We went out to the market. We got a player who would come to the club, who's an elite ruck, who could give Maxi a chop out. And we tried the experiment. We tried playing them together. Maxi's performance dropped off a cliff. Is that on Maxi? Maybe he said as much this year. He said as much that maybe he could have done some things differently. But nonetheless, we tried the experiment and it didn't work. And what are people criticising Melbourne for allowing Grundy to go? when he was contracted. I mean, come on. Like, it's a bit like you can't, having your cake and eat it too. So it's definitely an issue for us that we haven't got a legitimate backup ruck. But, I don't know the other clubs. George, you probably do better. There's probably a lot of other clubs who haven't really got a great backup ruck, and that if their number one goes down, they haven't got many other options.
Yeah, I think the only answer, and again, it's with retrospect, is that most other clubs have got some log who's sitting in the VFL who's capable of standing in the middle and putting a body on a body, and that's not much more. Unfortunately, we don't even have that, it would seem.
And so. Fullerton's not that. I watched on the weekend. He's not a big fella.
No, he's not. He's not built for that, and I don't think he was a backup ruck when we played Brisbane in the finals 2 years ago, was it? But beyond that, he's never played ruck.
No, he's not really. He's a forward ruck who can pinch hit in the ruck, not a ruckman who goes down forward. And as we say, Varel's a whiles off. So it is a legitimate question. I remember you mentioned this. Majak Daw was a big loss in terms of him for losing for Casey, like the challenge of not having a good ruck at Casey so everyone can practice their structures around that good ruck. But he was the exact sort of footballer that we could bring into this game, for instance. He would have, if he was playing at that level, even at the level he was playing the year he retired, I would have had him straight into this, and I'm sure Goody would have as well, because as you said, he would have been strong enough to wrestle Darcy and to compete at those around the ground stoppages. The big one for me in this game was, I thought, and he didn't get any criticism that I don't know, I didn't read Demonland much for the last 24 hours, but I didn't hear this mentioned, is Turner got completely schooled, and he wasn't much help in the ruck at all. As I already mentioned, JVR got schooled as well. Petty was, in fact, our best ruckman on the day, and he gets criticised, to the cows come home.
Track Forever says, I just want to shout out to Big Man for an absolutely amazing job he's done over the last 2 weeks with your support as well, Andy. I've loved hearing the stats and just wanted to say a big thank you. Why do we see the form of our ever-reliable players like Salem, Chandler and Clary drop off so much? Travy14 says, 2 players I'd like to know where you think they are at this stage of their career, as they worry me, is Bowie and Sparrow. Bowie in particular has been very average, missing targets, pulling out of contests and looking lost defensively at times. What do you guys think? Doug Reamer says, Salem, what's happened to him? Looks disinterested and has next to no impact on games, lots of sideways kicking. Has the game gone past him? Has he too much class to fade into? He has too much class to fade into mediocrity. How do you think we can use him better? And I've got a voicemail from good mate Salty.
Hey boys, Salty here. Really felt like that game just never really turned up to it. Midfield seemed to get dominated from the get-go. Don't know if the ruck made that big a difference, but it certainly seemed like the pressure they were able to put through their midfield we really weren't able to handle it, and the clearness numbers reflected that for the most part. I want to ask you all about your thoughts on, I think our middle tier of our team just really hasn't been that good this year. I think that our younger ones are playing pretty well, but middle tier not really getting it done. So I just wanted to get all your thoughts on Sparrow, Bowie, Salem. Me, these sort of guys that have been in the system a long time, Salem in particular, and just not getting it done. Sparrow in particular, we essentially chose him over Jordan, and Jordan's gone away and got significantly better, and Sparrow just seems like for all his great pre-season form, hasn't really done much in the actual season. So I just want to get your thoughts on them. I still think we should play the kids, put a fork in the season, get the best draft pick we can, go and get a key forward at an actual second ruckman on reload for 2025. Hope you all enjoy your holidays. Cheer me up, please.
Cheer you up. All right, we'll try. George, any thoughts on some of the mid-tier or even some of our usually more reliable players that seem to have dropped off this season? Sparrow, Bowie, Salem.
You've come to the wrong person to cheer you up. Sorry, Salty. So, this has been a real concern for us. Certainly with Salo, once again, just revisiting history, had thyroid problems before the season, didn't really start training until March. Then he got a quad injury, if I remember, or foot injury, I can't remember, quad, or knee. Comes back and didn't play in the last quarter in this game due to hamstring tightness. Not surprising. We've talked about it. If you don't get a decent pre-season, then you're not going to have a decent season. Same applies to Clary. He was in and out. He was sent home at one stage. There's all sorts of things which are suggested going on in the background. Whether or not they're correct or not doesn't really matter because he didn't have a proper football pre-season. So it's not surprising. Sparrow has been a real disappointment, though. Certainly in 21 after at the grand final and the premiership, he looked like the next one who was going to take that next step to be a really potent part of the midfield. But 3 years later now, he hasn't taken any further steps, which is a real disappointment. Bowie, he doesn't look like he has been. Difficult to judge, particularly in this game, because the defence was under so much pressure with the ball coming in. Normally, he's one of the guys who cleans up once the structures are in place, but we didn't have the structures in place. We didn't have the opportunity because the ball just kept going over the defenders' heads. But once again, he suffered that injury early on in the season. It's difficult to come back from any injuries, but he hasn't quite done as much. I would have preferred that he actually played in the ruck in this game because it wouldn't have made any difference to the outcome. You might as well get him in the middle, and we wouldn't have had to waste JVR and Petty from their proper roles. So I think these are symptomatics of the whole team at the moment. We've got injured players. When you take out your quality players out of any side, your performance drops off, and we're suffering right across the ground with all of these sort of players. And the second level players get exposed, unfortunately, when the better players aren't there. When you've got a Petrarca and you've got a Gorn and you've got a Clary at full tilt, everybody looks good around them, but when they're not there or not up to the standards that they've set, then the other second-tier players get really exposed, and people start to understand that they're second-tier players because they are second-tier players.
I thought Billings was, speaking of second-tier players, I thought Billings was pretty good when he came on, and sort of a way to think of his game, he had his player rating was 8.3. Caleb Windsor, who was on the game for, 84% time. Jack Billings was only on the ground 41%. His player rating was 8.4, so almost exactly the same. And Clayton Oliver, who was on the ground for,
84%.
84%. He was only 8.5, and so he's not one of those. I mean, this game he felt like a middle tier player. Chandler rating was only 9. Yeah. Ed Langdon's rating was only 9. And for me, this is one. So I think that's a really good point actually about those sort of middle rung players. Salo hasn't had a great season in some respects, and it certainly hasn't been doing any damage. That's the thing we have. That was one of the things that jumped out for me against Freo. How many of their players did damage? Like they were damaging. We didn't really, particularly with Cos. Like he was so dynamic last week, as I mentioned. His rating was 23 for that game. He just was not the same sort of player this week. And if you don't have those players, it's really hard, as you say, George, even for the middle rung players. But the one that, I'm not one to knock, and sort of, I think he gets misunderstood a little bit, but I thought it was another average game from, speaking of Cozzy, his average. So he had his 23 last week was his player rating, 7.2 in this game. That's a massive drop off. Like that's going from coaches' votes to, not getting drop territory, but that's pretty average. But the player that concerns me, who shouldn't be even considered a middle tier player, is definitely not. But he's playing like it sometimes. Not every week is Fritter. I don't know how you guys saw Fritter's game.
Much the same as the last 6 weeks, quite frankly.
And just some concerning body language stuff.
he doesn't chase, and we talked about this 2 years ago when we were in the same position. When you've got Melcham and Fritter in the same forward line, neither who chase or can chase. That really just that's one of the reasons the ball comes out so quickly out of the back line. Sorry, our forward line heads down the other end. You've got a number of players who just aren't putting the pressure on the way the ball's operating inside the forward 50. I think between the two of them, they only had one tackle.
Well, yeah, Fritter had 0 tackles.
Yeah, again.
Yeah, and that's and that goes. I spoke before about our pressure inside 50 and those weird anomalous numbers around our contested pressure. Like he only had. I mean, Cozzy at least had 5 tackles. So I'm just looking. Actually, he had 1 tackle. Fritter had 1 tackle. But Jake Billings, I thought, had he had 8 pressure acts. Jake Billings in a quarter of footy, and in a whole game of footy, Fritter only had 8 pressure acts. To me, that's sort of not good enough from a senior player when, it's exactly what you're saying. They were able to transition it from our forward line. Part of the puzzle is players not at all parts of the ground putting pressure on them and making it difficult and bringing them to ground and getting up to the mark and doing all of those 1%ers.
Track Forever says, of all the young players, who do you believe has the most upside? Monocular says, when and if September becomes a mathematical impossibility, will we change our plans and drop those who aren't by then committed to 2025 and beyond and bring in even more young blood? Kyner Brown had an unbelievable number of tackles at VFL and needs time on ground at AFL level. All the youngsters we blooded this year have been more than serviceable. Windsor, of course, the standout. Howes looks as if he will make it. Colt was, in my opinion, unlucky to be subbed out and has added just so much energy to the forward line. AMW just fits right in. Seston, Varel, not sure about McAdam and Fullerton, though. So let's take a little break and talk some positives before we get back into MFCSS territory, guys. Big Man, which of our young guns has the most upside? And I know you won't concede it yet, but if September becomes a mathematical impossibility, should we just throw the kids in?
Well, working back from that question, let's say, well, I don't think it won't become a mathematical impossibility, like really, because it won't for many teams. I mean, just look at the ladder, just forgetting Melbourne and forgetting our sort of emotional being tied into it. It is remarkable. The ladder is just nuts. Like, so, yeah, we got beaten by Freo and it was terrible, but we remain, only 4 points behind the team. We're favourites or come in equal favourites to beat next week in the Giants. So it is incredibly close. We beat the Giants next week. We'll be on level points with them and we'll be back inside the 8. We're only 6 points from 4th. I mean, it was such a opportunity. We would have been in 4th. That's how close it is. If we'd won this game, we would have been 4th, despite all of the, woe is us, Melbourne are terrible. We were. The reality is the ladder doesn't lie and we're 2 points out of the 8.
Well, do you want some mathematics thrown into the equation at the moment? Because there was a
go for it. There was as long as it doesn't tell a bad tale.
Well, it tells. Could potentially could. There's an account on Twitter or X or whatever it's called these days called Winnable, and they produced some percentages. So at the moment, our percentage to make top 4 is 3%. I'm not sure how they've worked all this out, but for the top 8 at the moment, it's 31%. If we win this week...
Okay, so 31%, right? So that's a 1 in 3 chance of making the 8.
Okay.
1 in 3. And so if you ask your average Demonland poster, it'd be 1 in 30 of the tone of posting over the last... No, honestly.
Okay. All right. I've got some more.
1 in 3 chance is like, what's that? That's...
2 in 3 chance. It's 2 in 3 chances of not making it.
That's how I see
it. Of course it is, but that's the way. Yeah, like that's. That yeah, of course it's.
All right, so if we win, I've got to 1 sec. You can continue in a sec. So if we win this week, we're a 4% chance of top 4. I think we can count out top 4 at the moment. All right, but if we win, top 8's 44%. So, Big Man, you get.
But we win this week, we're a 50-50 chance of making the top, and that's just like that's not me being positive. That's just a fact.
And then if we lose this week, we're a 0% chance of making the top 4. So let's forget top 4. If we lose this week, we're a 13% chance of making the top 8.
So this week's important.
All right, you can continue.
Yeah.
That's your mathematics.
All right, that's really, to be honest, that makes my point. Yes, you could say, well, we're two out of 3 chances of not making it, but we're also a third of the chance of making it, right? So even that's how close this season is. And that's just the reality. If we beat the Giants this week, we're likely to be back in the 8th. So yes, it was a bad loss, but we're still in the season. Whether we can be a contender at top 4, whether we can compete against the Swans in their current form, that's perhaps a different conversation. But let's at least be realistic about what our chances are of making the 8. And if we make the finals this year, it will, provide a lot of people would see that as a victory, wouldn't they? Given the struggles we've had. So that point about, though, just going back to the question about bringing the kids in. So let's say hypothetically it goes to 0 and you missed a squiggle thing just then, right? We play the kids. Who exactly would we play?
Yeah.
Which kids would we play? We're not going to be playing Varel because it's no good for his career.
He's talking about
At any point bringing Jefferson in at this stage of his career, a picket fence on Demon Lamb would very much like, g'day picket fence if you're out there, he'd very much like Jefferson to be brought in for Petty, who, by the way, had his best game for the season in the weekend just got, so he's not going anywhere. So what do? Which kids exactly would you put? The only player I could see coming from Casey is the one that it already has, is Pup. And there's not a single other player who I could see, or Laurie maybe, but he's not. That's not hardly Laurie's playing the kids, is it? He's the same age as Bowie. So it's not as we have been playing the kids, haven't it? In case anyone's not noticed, that's what we have been playing. That's what I keep saying. We had again a younger team than Freo. Again, same with the Bombers. Again, the previous week against the Eagles, and the same, almost similar demographic, almost identical to the Roos, who are in the 2nd or 3rd year of a rebuild. So we have been playing the kids. The first question: who do I think has got the most upside of our young players? I reckon McVee. I think McVee's got the most upside. I could see him becoming our Dacos. I think he was terrific in this game. He was brilliant last week. He's got an ability to play on bigs, on smalls. I think he's got enormous upside, and my sense is in the 2 or 3 years' time he'll be talked about in the same way that Nick Dacos is. He's got time and space. He's got an ability to make quick decisions. His ceiling is super high. Windsor's an obvious one. He's a jet. Colt looks like he's got the talent and the drive, but for me, the most upside is Judd McVee.
I'll go for Windsor, simply because it's his very first year and he has played every single game, and he moves so well, and he's still running hard for a young player. What are we, 17 rounds into this season? He's built like a stick, but he's resilient. He reminds me so much of Robbie Flower, the way that he's able to extricate himself from contest, the way that he reads the play so beautifully. I think we're going to see a lot of him into the future. But totally agree with Bin Man. Who are the kids that we're not playing? There's simply none at Casey. We've been playing Woden, we've been playing Colt, we've been playing Laurie, we've been playing these young guys. The sad fact is we don't have a great deal of depth at Casey to be able to play anymore. You're not going to bring in Jefferson. You're not going to bring in Varel. They need
not yet. They'll come in. They'll get into the side, but
they need to be developed. The worst thing you could possibly do would be to bring either of those players in at this stage and get them absolutely smashed by someone. Let's say against GWS, have got a very good backline.
Particularly Jefferson.
Yeah,
he's a future player. You don't wreck now for future, do you?
No, and there's no point. If you're throwing the season away, why throw away the potential that you might have for the future with these guys? But other than those, we don't have a great deal. We've got a lot of list cloggers down at Casey that are going to take 2 years to get rid of, quite frankly. And it's going to take a long time to get the players that we need to replace them up to the required levels. So, we're already playing the young ones that we have got available.
But I guess that goes to your 2/3 chance of not making a 1/3, as we've talked about. I think our list of young players is almost the best in the AFL. The only one that comes, I think, Freo, as you noted, they've got some good young players. Roos have got some phenomenal young players.
Roos are going to be challenging.
Yeah. Roos have got some phenomenal young players like that. Sheasel I struggle with. He's underrated, I reckon. That's how good he is. It's just
Wardlaw's the same.
Wardlaw's the same. So I think we're well positioned. I think, that's one of the positives. No matter what happens in this season, no matter where we go from here, we have been playing the young players. So Colt will have 15 games under his belt coming into next season. Windsor will have played a full season of AFL football. Pup's had his debut. You've got Turner, who might end up being a key position forward for us for 10 years. You've got Van Ruin, who's just turned 21. Like, he is just 21. I saw Logan McDonald on the weekend. He's a year older, maybe 2 years older than JVR. He's still, hasn't got close to his potential. JVR won't be at his best till he's 23, 24. He's got another 3 years before he's there. So the future looks super bright on that front. I agree with Windsor. One of the things that Windsor's, he's a natural footballer like McVie. One of the things I love about him is that he makes good decisions, quickly. But of upside, I reckon I've been really pleasantly surprised with Andy Menzies-Wakefield. He's the sort of player like Labuschagne in Test match cricket that when they go up a level, they seem to be able to play better at a higher level than when the ball's moving quickly. And I thought he didn't have a great game on the weekend just gone, but he's been really excellent. His upside could be really big, particularly if he can play that small defender role that I've been talking about.
I think we'll burn through the next couple of questions quickly. Just on tagging, Oh My D's asks, why didn't we put a tag on Hayden Young? He was killing us coming off the half-back line into the centre square and helping Freo get clearance time and time again. So, George, any thoughts on our lack of tagging this week, or did we even try?
Simple
answer is pretty much the same as the previous one. Who would you like to put on?
Well, Nibbler has been used as effectively
who are you going to put on? Yeah, who are you going to put on Saronga?
Yeah, Brayshaw, that's the thing.
And we still got absolutely, utterly, completely pantsed.
Yep. All right. I don't think we need to go on with that. There you go, Oh My D's. Jabroni asks, when does reality set in? We are not as good as we think we are. So, Big Man, you're not the person to ask of this.
I was about to say,
perhaps you're the
whose
perfect
reality?
person to ask.
If you read Demonland, no one thinks we're any good. So, if it's your two's reality, well, that you've crossed that Rubicon a long time ago, haven't you? So, if it's my reality, I still think we're good. It probably I'll go to my grave going that Mighty D's are fantastic and a chance at top four.
The last person who crossed the Rubicon took over Rome.
Well, I bet it was well coached. His structure was good. Behind the ball.
Yeah.
Do you still think we can win the whole thing?
Yes, if everything falls right, it's in that category. It's in the
Stephen Bradbury.
Well, no. Look, here's my theory of the argument: is that I think football's changing before our eyes, and fitness, as I've been talking about now for a year and a half, 2 years, is I think becoming, next to the depth of your list, and I actually, personally think coaching's overrated. I've always thought that you need the cattle. So cattle, number one, you need luck. But I think more and more high performance programs are the defining feature of the game in terms of chances of winning a flag. The game has become so aerobically challenged. I'm positive that that's a huge factor in these incredibly volatile results. Like Geelong won 4 of their last 5 games, lose at home to the Dogs. The Dog got flogged by Port. They come out and beat the Blues the next week. If you just take off your Melbourne supporting hat and look at it just in terms of the results, and because I punt on the line, I'm always looking at these numbers in terms of the line, in terms of the gap between the teams, the winning margin or the losing margin, whatever the case may be. And it's all over the shop this year. And so's total match points. Like, I'm not even betting on total match points this year because it's so volatile. Games that you think are going to be low scoring or high scoring, games that are high, you think are going to be high scoring or low scoring. And it's got everything to do where teams are at when they meet each other in terms of how fresh they are and how, like 20 years ago, structure and system and quality of players could overcome those things. Now, we just saw on the weekend, Freo just ran us off our legs. And so I think it's a huge, huge factor. And so, I think we can make it. And I'm thinking of the Dogs back in 2016. Everything's got to go right. Swans fall away. I think where there's hope, if we make the finals, of course, we've got a chance, but, not a great one.
Next one, I don't think we need to answer because I think we've talked about it. Tank or try, I'm starting to come to terms that, this is El Diablo, sorry. Tank or try, I'm starting to come to terms that even if we somehow make it to the finals, we are not capable of winning even one game. I think we all agree that our list needs a significant overhaul, a couple of players to retire and delist, have some cap space to use, and we could get a top 6 pick, get Gawn and track fit and ready for season 2025. A last dance for May, Gawn, T-Mac and Melksham. We'll just leave that as a comment. We have a voicemail. I had switched off while I was on holidays. I switched off the voicemail for the Skype. When I turned it on again, we had received a call last week from a new unknown caller. He had a comment on last week's match. I'm just going to play it now because it's short and just to give him his due because he took the time to reach out to us. So here is our unknown caller.
Hey guys, first time caller here. I'm not actually on Demonland, but I listen to your podcast every single week. Been great. I just thought I'd ring up and say that this is the first game I actually felt quietly comfortable about all year.
Essendon game.
And boy, did the boys not let me down. What a game. What a game. Boys were magnificent all night, I thought. Even in the wet weather, which I didn't think would do too great in once that started coming down. But they played a game out of their skins, I thought. Anyway, thanks for your time. Look forward to the podcast. Thanks, guys.
I love it.
Please,
that's great.
Who was that, Andy?
I don't know. Unknown caller. He didn't give a name. So next time, leave a name. Doesn't have to be a real one. You can make one up like we gave.
It's like the Demonland equivalent of the unknown soldier, but not quite as dramatic. Yeah. So the unknown caller, we were terrific last week. So let's not pretend we weren't.
So I thought, he took the time to call, listener to the show, give him his due. So that's why I played it this week. Let's talk Casey quickly. In the wet and wild conditions, the Casey Demons fell to the Frankston Dolphins by 27 points at Kinetic Stadium. The match was heavily influenced by strong winds and heavy rain, making clean possession difficult and affecting kicking accuracy throughout. Frankston's second quarter dominance, where they kicked 7 goals to Casey's 1, set the tone for the match. The Demons failed to capitalise on the breeze in the opening term and were unable to recover from the Dolphins' onslaught, trailing by 27 points at half-time. Casey was already facing an uphill battle with only 5 AFL-listed players available, including late withdrawals Ben Brown and Tajwa Woden, which left them 1 player short on the bench. This disadvantage was significant, especially given the taxing conditions underfoot. Despite the tough circumstances, several Casey players stood out. Melbourne rookie Kynan Brown was exceptional, recording 27 disposals and an incredible 24 tackles. 11 clearances and a goal. His fearless approach and high work rate were highlights in the muddy and blustery conditions. Mitch White displayed strong leadership by amassing 24 disposals and 13 tackles. Jack Bell was a key target up forward, scoring 2 goals. Ronan Steele played his 50th VFL match and racked up 23 disposals. And in defence, Blake Howes and Marty Hoare each finished with 21 disposals, working tirelessly to stem the flow of Frankston's attacks. Josh Shackey also made a notable contribution with 18 disposals in a move to defence. Despite leading by 1 goal at quarter time, Casey struggled with accuracy and consistency in the wet conditions. Ultimately, Frankston's second quarter blitz and the harsh weather proved too much for the Demons to overcome. Casey will look to bounce back as they face the GWS Giants next Saturday on home turf at Casey Fields. Big man, you said you watched it, George. I'm not sure if you did. Yep, you did. Some quick observations.
I had a flashback to watching Dandenong. He's like, were the Dandenong's red legs?
Yep.
Yeah, I used to like Dandenong, and that's what I had a flashback, sort of Frankston Dandenong on a Sunday afternoon watching the VFL, and that's what it felt like. I didn't recognise any of the names except for a handful, and didn't recognise any of Frankston's name, and it's a stupid ground, that kinetic, stupid name. It's like a tram track. It wasn't much of a game to really, it was a pretty average game. It was raining pretty heavily, though, for almost all of it, or a big chunk of it.
First half was a screaming wind.
Yeah, there was wind, so yeah.
Yeah, they were kicking goals from the centre square, or Frankston were, and Casey didn't do much in the first quarter, which killed them in the end.
And then, really hard to take anything out of it, really.
Then it belted down completely in the third quarter, and then the last quarter was fine. Lovely weather.
Which is when they kicked away. So weather. There were, to be honest, nothing jumped out from a Melbourne perspective. Fullerton didn't have a game where he didn't play. No, I was going to say didn't see the whole match, so that's probably why. There were, I don't know, did you anything jump out for you positive-wise, George, in that match?
The only real positives I thought were Marty Hoare in the back line, who did a great job. He reads the play so beautifully. It's a pity we haven't got a place for him, although with Salem probably not coming up next week, we might be able to find a hole for him.
Injured, is he?
Well, he did a hamstring. He didn't play the last quarter.
Oh, right, okay.
Hamstring tightness was what was listed in the match report.
Yeah, so of the Casey ones, Hoare was fantastic. Really, really disappointed in Adams. Barely got a touch of the ball, considering how often the ball was coming into the back line. The Kynan Brown was fantastic, but again, it's really hard to take big on numbers, but it was so wet and so horrible in the middle. You should be able to get 27 tackles. Maybe we should use him in our forward line for someone who will tackle the opposition, because the ball was just constantly in contested after contest after contest, and so it was surprising. The trouble is you wouldn't dare put him in an AFL midfield because he'll get smashed. He'll be broken in two. He just hasn't got the body to be able to do that. Jefferson, for me, was also very, very, very disappointing.
Mr. Sitter.
I was just about to say Jefferson didn't. Then I thought to myself, I'll bet you didn't play so far.
No,
he did play.
He missed an absolute sitter, which he should have gotten. There's plenty of people do that. He just doesn't look fit.
Well, it's
he just doesn't. He just doesn't run.
It was the same issue with Wiedemann. Is that he was better a few weeks ago, but it just the problem for me. So he's not yet at AFL fitness, so there's that. Yeah. But for me, like my number one thing on footballers about whether they're ready for the AFL or the next step is whether that second effort and third effort is instinctive. Like it happens before. That's. I remember you and I talking on the pod with Andy. With JVR, it's like it was so obvious that the kid wanted the footy, and that's not the same with Jefferson, is it?
No, and he's really slow off the mark, which will kill you in AFL at AFL level. You've got to be able to almost sprint, being a forward, to gain that metre needed to be able to get rid of your defender. And Jefferson's good overhead mark. He doesn't jump is the other problem that I've got with him. He has got a long, long way before he develops to an AFL standard. People just look at the name on the list and the fact that he's playing forward and say, well, look, he's kicking all these goals. But as Binman said before, the difference between VFL and AFL is absolutely chalk and cheese. You should be kicking, as JVR was in his first year, you should be kicking 30 and 40 goals if you're serious about taking that next step. Jeffo needs to be able to do that.
And just on that, George, it's interesting this season because it's streamed on the AFL app. Commentary's variable. That's one thing. But I've watched a bit more VFL footy than I have in previous years, and like you've watched more of it than me in the last few years. Am I right to say that the standards dropped off a fair bit in the last 5 years or so, or is
no? It's really dramatically dropped off, particularly when they've got the non-affiliated sides, the Frankstons, Northern Bull Ants, those sort of players, Coburg, and then they're throwing in Southport's a very strong club, but they're throwing all these second-rate clubs into the competition, and it is really second and probably third rate. The AFL sides that are affiliated, like this round, we had 5 players available. So you're filling it up with not just Casey affiliated players
in the bush, and
Frankston, YCW are putting players on the ground.
Yeah.
It's that sort of standards.
And then you don't get any cohesion amongst the team because you've got players that probably never played with each other or trained with each other. So.
Yeah. We've talked about how in previous years when fit, it goes to the injuries as well, but having your second team mirror all of your setups and structures that your first team play, but you can't do that, for instance, if you don't have a ruck who can mimic the dominance of Max, for instance, or so there's that challenge. But just on that sort of the bigger point, though, I think is that this idea of depth is wherever you land on Melbourne's depth, every club struggles with depth. Swans, if they lose 2 or 3 players and they look like they're going to lose a couple from the weekend, if they lose 3 or 4 players, they'll be back in the pack. Collingwood, they partly their challenge is they've lost 3 or 4 of their best players. Like it's just, and I really worry about when the Tasmanian team comes in because there's just not that. And there's just not enough elite runners who can also play footy for this many teams, I don't reckon.
Yeah, I can just see us bottoming out at that time and then being screwed on draft picks.
I can hear you. I can hear it now. As we're the Demons and we're going to be beaten by the Devils. Like, how terrible are we?
How dare they name them the Devils? All right, let's get on to the injury list. We had one casualty from Sunday's match against the Dockers with Christian Salem reportedly pulling up with a tight hamstring, so watch this space. We'll see what happens there. But all eyes will be firmly on the fitness of Captain Max Gawn, who last week was close to overcoming that crack in his ankle. So let's get into changes. So if Max is available this week, who's coming in? Who's going out? Big Man, followed by George.
Well, last week I accurately predicted no one would come out. Who will come in? Well, Maxi's got to come back, doesn't he?
Well, if he's fit. How close was he last week?
Well, it depends who he wanted to play, apparently, is what I've heard. Like he was dead keen to play, and I'm sort of glad they didn't because I don't think it would have made much difference. So it's not, like one player's not going to make a difference anyway, but not with that lack of spread. If we can't cover those outlets and their spread, it doesn't matter if Maxi played. So a benefit at least he's had 2 weeks off legs, I guess, or so he'll come back surely. It sort of goes to this 33% and jumping to 44% if we win, Andy. So I think I hope he certainly plays. And then who comes out? I guess you work backwards from Billings and I think I thought Billings was pretty good actually, so he might keep his spot. But Maxi in, I don't know who comes out for Maxi.
Salem.
Well, it all depends on what.
He's definitely out, is he?
Well, we don't know. It's just tightness. It depends.
Yeah, I'd say he's out. Say he's out for a week and probably more, probably 4 to 6.
4 to 6. Well, I'm just saying Maxi in. I'm not saying who's coming out.
All right, George. Any thoughts?
No, not really beyond that. I don't think we've got a handle on, it's going to be one of the fringe players come in or out, the Billings, the Woden, the Laurie, the Kynan Brown, pick one, anyone.
Yeah.
One thing, though, about Maxi, like this week is another challenge because it's Biggs, isn't it? Is it Biggs or Briggs?
Briggs.
He's a pretty formidable-looking young fellow in terms of his ruck work. And,
he's Mumford Mark II.
Yeah, so he... Maxi, we need you. Come back. If you're listening, Maxi, I don't care how bad your ankle is. He's not listening. Aren't you his sponsor? Can you tell him to start listening?
Yeah, I can. I don't mean he will.
And Petty and JVR are sending the same message.
Yeah,
They
come
are, that's
back.
right. Especially JVR, I reckon.
The Demons are hanging on by a thread to remain in contention for finals with a tough 5 weeks ahead. We might be only one game and percentage out of the 8, but we can't really afford to drop many or any games in the next month and change if we want to challenge for September. Most, if not all, of our next few games are 8-point games against other contenders, as this very well could be our last roll of the dice. Demon WA says, Andy, you should have remained on holiday. No, believe me, I would have if I could afford it. In all seriousness, though, that was a game that no one's ladder predictor would have had us winning. A win next week against the hot and cold Giants, and we're back on track. Yes, a win could get us back on track. George, followed by Bimman, how are we going to right the ship that was almost sunk by the Dockers?
Don't create turnovers against the Giants, because they will absolutely thread us the same as Fremantle did. That's a big thing. I've still got big questions about the fitness levels and whether we can sustain it. The Giants are absolutely packed with players who are skillful. The weather report's actually showing some rain on the horizon, which might be the biggest thing in our favour.
A couple of weeks ago, we were dreading any rain. Now it's bring it on.
Yeah, we seem to have learned how to play wet weather football in recent weeks. It's a pity we couldn't do it earlier or in previous years. But the Giants are a really big threat. They've just got so much talent there that's really scary. The trouble is they don't bring it every week, and let's hope they don't this week.
Not a million miles away from Freo's game. In fact, the Giants, they've got a similar all teams like pressure. All teams like being forward half. You win, but you win lots of games of footy if you obviously you win that forward half game if you can. But they're ranked number 1 in the AFL for handballs per game, so they like Freo, like Bombers, they like to get that ball moving forward with handball, and I think that's what we've been trying to implement too, sort of not as successfully as those teams. And they're ranked 2 for disposals per game, and I think that's behind Freo in terms of they like to use chain out, similar to the way the Bombers and Freo like to do. They move it not quite as, they don't use the width, they're much more straight line footy, but they certainly look to go fast off that halfback flank. But they've also balanced that by, they're 3rd in the AFL for tackles per game. So, they really, I think, they like the contest, and it'll be won and lost in the contest. I think really every game we go into, if our pressure's not up there and, we're not winning the contested ball, then we're not going to win. So it will really come down to our ability to get to that pressure level and contest level that we showed, at times last week. So in the game against Freo, but certainly against the Bombers. And a bit will depend on, our ability to shut some of their sort of key players who, they've been sort of on an upper swing too. It's also good to remember that they lost 4 out of 5 games just a few weeks ago, the Giants. So, as I've been at pains to point out, all teams have had their periods of struggle. They've got a pretty good record against us at the G, I think. There was a game do you know what their record at the G? Did you mention that before?
They beat us. I didn't, but they beat us in our premiership season there. We thumped them the next year, I believe. It was early in the year, but they have beaten us a couple of times there. But
what I would say is what I said ahead of the North game is get along. We had 30,000 plus against the Roos, and I thought it was a big factor. And so it would be great if Melbourne fans turn up for what is a really, really must-win game. How many more games have we got at home this year?
Good question. We play Collingwood. I'm sure it's there.
That's our home game.
Bulldogs is a marvel, I know. And
Gold Coast is in Gold Coast.
Yeah.
And then Collingwood's at home.
Yeah.
So we're only 2 more home games for the season. So, that's every Demon fan who can get along, go bananas, And, let's turn that 33%, 1 in 3 chance of making the finals to basically 50-50 chance of making the finals.
Yep, let's do that. Well, we're going to leave it there for tonight. We'll be back next week. If you want to listen to the show live, please head on over to demonland.com on Monday night at a new earlier time of 7:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewer on Apple Podcasts. Thank you to Penny Dropper. Thank you to our voicemailers, Rose Star, Salty, and our unknown caller. Your questions and comments form an integral part of the show. So thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to the Pearl, Magnus, Sam6172, the Taciturn Demon, Swooper, Northy, Monocular, Lazy, Logs, Gaundy the Great, Spirit of Norm Smith, Clintosaurus, Buck Naked, Travi14, Track Forever, Doug Reamer, Oh My D's, Gibroni, El Diablo 14, Fire in the Benelli, and Demon WA. Thank you to my co-hosts, George and B-Man, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget, leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from. We'll read it out on next week's show. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.